People believe the world changes only when guns fire and armies march. But the truth is far stranger. Some of the most destructive wars in human history were fought without a single soldier stepping onto a battlefield. These wars didn't roar with explosions. They unfolded quietly through bank vaults, interest rates, and carefully printed pieces of paper. Wars your school never taught you about. Wars where no flags rise, but entire nations fall apart. These are currency wars. Silent battles that have shaped empires as much as any legendary general. And if you think this is just economic stuff, you're missing the bigger picture. Currency wars decide who eats and who starves, who rules and who obeys. And the most chilling part? They haven't stopped. They're happening right now, silently influencing the value of every dollar sitting in your pocket. The rule behind these hidden wars is simple. Use money as a weapon. Sometimes countries weaken their own currency on purpose to make their goods cheaper. Sometimes they flood the world with easy loans just to break a rival's economy. Sometimes they stockpile gold to squeeze anyone who needs it. From the outside, it looks like clever strategy. But in reality, it's the economic version of releasing poison gas. You might damage your enemy first, but eventually, that poison circles back to you too. One of the earliest modern battles of this kind erupted during the Great Depression, and the world would never be the same again. After the 1929 stock market crash, economies spiraled into chaos. Nations were desperate to sell their goods abroad to survive, but with global demand collapsing, they resorted to competitive devaluation. Britain left the gold standard in 1931, sending the pound tumbling. The United States followed in 1933, slashing the dollar's gold content. France, Italy, Japan, everyone raced to cheapen their currency. But instead of reviving trade, it triggered what economists call a beggar-thy-neighbor spiral. Imports became more expensive, living standards fell, and the tension helped pave the road to the Second World War. Currency wars, though, didn't start in the 1930s. The Roman Empire was fighting its own version almost 2,000 years ago. Back then, their currency was the silver denarius, and Rome's power rested on its credibility. But as the empire expanded and wars grew costlier, emperors found a tempting shortcut. Mix the silver with cheaper metals, stretching the supply while claiming it was still the same coin. At first, the difference was small, a little less silver here, a little more copper there. But over time, the silver content dropped from nearly 100% to less than 5%. It was the ancient version of running the printing press, and the result was predictable: inflation, loss of trust, and eventually economic collapse. The barbarians at the gates weren't the only problem. Rome had already sabotaged itself from within. Fast forward to the 20th century, and the battleground became even more complex. After the Second World War, the global financial system was rebuilt at Bretton Woods, with the United States dollar pegged to gold and other currencies pegged to the dollar. This system was supposed to end currency wars by fixing exchange rates, but it created a new kind of power dynamic. Because the United States controlled the dollar, and by extension the gold supply, it could project money and power across the globe. Countries that stepped out of line found themselves facing financial pressure instead of direct military confrontation. It was quieter, cleaner, and often more effective. But this dominance came at a cost. By the late 1960s, the United States was printing more dollars than it could back with gold, funding both the Vietnam War and ambitious domestic programs. Foreign governments noticed, and they began demanding gold in exchange for their dollars. Facing a run on Fort Knox, President Richard Nixon made a decision in August 1971 that shocked the world. He closed the gold window, ending the dollar's convertibility to gold. Overnight, the Bretton Woods system collapsed. The world entered a new era of floating exchange rates, and with it, a new age of currency wars. One of the most brutal modern examples happened in the 1980s, though few remember it as such. Japan was rising fast, powered by manufacturing exports and a strong work ethic. Its trade surplus with the United States was enormous, and Washington was not happy. In 1985, the United States, Japan, West Germany, France, and the United Kingdom signed the Plaza Accord, an agreement to deliberately push down the value of the US dollar and push up the yen and the German mark. On paper, it was about trade balance. In reality, it was a coordinated currency strike. The yen's value doubled in just 2 years, making Japanese exports far more expensive. Japan's asset bubble inflated, then burst spectacularly in the 1990s, leading to decades of stagnation. The United States didn't fire a shot. It just used the currency markets as artillery. The thing about currency wars is that they rarely look like wars in real time. They look like policy debates, interest rate decisions, or international summits. But the victims are real. Factories closing, unemployment surging, savings evaporating. In the 1997 Asian financial crisis, the Thai baht collapsed after speculative attacks forced the government to abandon its peg to the dollar. The crisis spread to Indonesia, South Korea, Malaysia. Currencies plunged, economies contracted, and millions were thrown into poverty almost overnight. It was a stark reminder that in a globalized financial system, one nation's devaluation can become another nation's catastrophe. If you think this is just history, think again. Today, we are living through what many economists call Currency War 4.0. The tools have changed. Central banks slash interest rates to near zero or even negative. They unleash quantitative easing programs that flood the world with liquidity. And they weaponize sanctions to freeze assets and cut countries out of the global payment system. The United States and China are locked in a subtle, high-stakes battle over currency influence. The dollar is still the world's reserve currency, but China has been pushing the internationalization of the yuan, creating alternative payment networks and stockpiling gold. Meanwhile, emerging economies face a cruel dilemma. Keep interest rates low to support growth and risk capital flight, or raise them to defend the currency and choke the economy. Either way, the playing field is tilted in favor of the biggest players. The pandemic of 2020 turned this slow-motion war into a sprint. Governments around the world printed unprecedented amounts of money to fund stimulus packages. In the United States alone, trillions of dollars were created in less than 2 years. At first, the effects seemed manageable. Stock markets soared, unemployment fell, and consumer spending roared back. But the bill always comes due. By 2022, inflation was at 40-year highs, and the Federal Reserve began aggressively raising interest rates. That created ripple effects worldwide. The stronger dollar made imports more expensive for other countries, fueled debt crises in places like Sri Lanka, and pushed weaker currencies to the brink. The same policies meant to stabilize one nation can destabilize dozens of others. That's the hidden cost of a currency war. It's not just between two sides. It's fought on a battlefield where everyone's forced to participate. History tells us that currency wars rarely have clean endings. They tend to spiral until something breaks, a currency collapses, a new monetary system emerges, or political instability forces change. In the 17th century, the Dutch guilder dominated world trade. Then came Britain's pound sterling in the 19th century, and finally, the dollar in the 20th. Each transition was messy, tied to wars, defaults, and economic upheaval. Now, whispers are growing about what comes next. Will the dollar hold its position for another 50 years? Will a multipolar system emerge, with digital currencies backed by central banks competing for dominance? Or will we see something entirely new, like decentralized cryptocurrencies gaining enough trust to challenge the old order? These aren't just abstract questions for economists. They determine the value of your savings, the cost of your food, the stability of your job. The most dangerous thing about currency wars is that the average person doesn't even know they're happening. When a bomb falls, you hear it. When a currency loses 20% of its value, you only notice when groceries cost more and your rent goes up. By the time the headlines catch up, the damage is done. That's why financial education is so critical. If you understand the patterns, the way inflation eats away at real wealth, the way central banks and governments use the financial system to project power, you can take steps to protect yourself. You can diversify your assets, hold a portion in things that retain value outside the financial system, and avoid falling for the illusion that the numbers in your bank account are the same as security. In the end, currency wars are a reminder that money is not neutral. It is not just a medium of exchange. It is a tool of strategy, control, and sometimes destruction. The victors are not always the smartest or the most productive. Often, they are simply the most powerful. And the losers are those who never realized they were part of the fight until it was too late. History doesn't repeat exactly, but the themes are familiar. Debasement in Rome, devaluation in the 1930s, the Plaza Accord in the 1980s, quantitative easing in the 2010s, and whatever comes next. The names and faces change. The playbook stays the same. So the next time you hear about a currency shift, a sudden cut in interest rates, or another set of sanctions, don't treat it like some distant economic update. See it for what it truly is, the first move in a larger conflict. And remember, in a currency war, you don't need to wear a uniform to end up on the losing side. Knowing how these battles work is the first step to staying safe. The next step is preparing before the impact reaches your life. Focus on building real, lasting wealth, not just numbers printed on paper. Study the system, watch the patterns, and keep in mind, when money becomes a weapon, the only safe position is the one outside its line of fire. If this changed the way you think, hit subscribe. History doesn't hide the truth. You just need to search it.